Hello and welcome to the Skoda Superb Drive right here on ET Now. Now, if you've been tracking our show over the last few weeks, you'll know that every week we've presented an achiever to you, whether he is from the corporate world as part of the management or he set up his own company. And it's our turn to meet up with another such achiever on this show this week. Follow me. And my guest today on the show is somebody who's taken many twists and turns in his journey. He started off by being an FMCG man, cut his teeth in the world of sales and marketing, thereafter tried his hand at being an entrepreneur, and finally settled down to joining the lubricants industry. So this week on the Skoda Superb Drive, you're going to be meeting with somebody who's heading one of the largest lubricant companies in the country. In fact, the company has been here for almost a century. And the brand is associated with names like John Abraham, cricket. Well, enough of the suspense. Let me make you meet with the man himself, the CEO and automotive director of Castrol India, Ravi Kirpalani. Ravi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paramita. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Shall we? Ravi, many thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Paramita. Pleasure.
So, I thought a good point to start off this journey today would be where you find yourself right now, both as heading a company which on the face of it appears to be staring at some serious headwinds, looking at the lubricants market, looking at the state of the auto market. Where would you find yourself right now?
It's been a great career, and I've sort of been really privileged to work with some great companies. So if you ask me what my current state of mind is, I think it'd be one of happiness. I'm glad where I am personally. In a sense, in spite of the challenges you talk about for Castrol, and they're real, we can talk about them, I think we're still in a good place. And even though the market in the near term has been challenging, as I look to the future, I'm still very encouraged that Castrol has a lot of potential to grow, and as the economy and as the automotive sector in India grows. We're now even bigger. In 2000, we were bought over by BP. So you probably know this, we're now part of a very large international organization called BP. And it's a great place to work. I mean, I know you'd probably think being CEO, that's what you'd expect me to say. But I feel really sort of not just blessed, but charged up each morning. You jump out of bed and come to work. I get to work very early in the morning. And part of the reason is I genuinely enjoy what I do. You know,
if you look at your business here, India was a star. India was a star for most people in the last few years. And that star appears to be dimming, especially if you look at the kind of growth trajectories and the way it's been slipping. So, I mean, how do you sort of steer yourself, the plan for 2013? And that's what we ask, you know, most CEOs at this point in time. And they sort of scratch their head and say, let's see how the market plays itself out. Because there's still that fingers crossed, we hope growth is beginning to pick up kind of a phenomena. Is that what you would describe it as?
I'm a little more sanguine with regard to the longer term prospects in India. I think the fundamental growth drivers that we saw in India in 2010 haven't gone away, right? In a sense, we've created some problems for ourselves in the last few years. And I think a lot of people think that if you think the big picture, you know, the fate of 1 billion people can't be held ransom by just a few bad policies. At some stage, we will overcome these, and I'm sure we'll find the model that leads to growth. So as we think about our business and as we invest in our business today, we're still planning for growth. So even though the last 2 years have been challenging, we're not giving up. We're not sort of saying, okay, what do I need to contract? What do I need to do to downscale? Because, heck, tomorrow is going to be really tough.
Right.
But the conversations in Castrol have been, okay, so we know growth's going to come. It's not going to come next 6 months, it's going to come in a year from now. And how do I get prepared to build capability, to build infrastructure? So when the growth comes, we're ready to take advantage of it again.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the growth and slice it up a little bit. One is, of course, you have been, and the perception is a lot of investment into marketing, and it is a marketing heavy company. As in you've promoted a lot of big, or you have taken a lot of big brands as well onto your portfolio. Sports is clearly a big part of it. Does that focus still stay intact? Is that going to be part of your strategy?
It is. You know, The interesting reason why we get so excited about India is that over the next 5 years, there are going to be something like 50 million new cars and bikes sold in our country. Now, if you think about that, a large number of the people who are going to be buying these cars are going to be first-time users. So they've had no family ownership of any automobile. I think what's interesting, even though Castrol has a great heritage and has a very strong brand, we need to establish a connect with this new young first-time user, right? So we need to constantly think about how we can engage these consumers, and especially the first-time users who are coming into automobile usership. And sports, like cricket particularly, is a passion in this country.
It's a huge connect, right?
So really the rationale for being a global sponsor for ICC goes back to the need to connect and to create an emotional bond where Castrol can become a part of the conversation beyond lubricants. And I think some of the work we've done in that space is really to try and build a deeper bond with first-time users.
Right. There is a sense that 2013 is going to be a bit better than 2012. How much are you looking at the big policy changes in that sense?
I think 2013 is still going to be challenging, right? I agree. We all hope it's going to be a little bit better than 2012. But as we're planning for 2013, we believe it's still going to be challenging. And I think if you look at the automotive sector and the automotive chiefs I speak to, I don't think necessarily see this reversing very quickly. Yeah, sure, if the interest rates cuts will come, they will help greatly.
What about industrial production? I mean, that was a big cause for your performance also slipping because of the pressures there.
That is true. My own expectation, the people I speak to seem to believe the next 2-3 quarters are probably continue to be challenging. That's one. The demand may not completely unlock. The second is that the rupee still remains volatile. Now, the problem with today's scenario, Paramita, is that if you think about running a business, the assumptions that you take in planning your business could be so volatile.
What kind of a forward hedge are you taking on the rupee, for
So we
instance?
don't hedge. BPS policy doesn't allow any local company to hedge, so we don't take a position on the foreign exchange.
Right.
What we've now agreed to do for the first time in India, and that's unique, is that let's say we have a consignment of base oil that we've imported, and we know we have to pay for it in 60 days from now. So we will take a cover just for that exposure in 60 days.
Okay.
The advantage there is that I'm trying to cut down volatility. I'm not trying to take a position on the currency. I'm just saying that I know now when I take a forward cover, which I have to pay in 60 days, I know what my real rate of exchange is going to be because that's locked in.
But is that a little frustrating for you, the fact that you're not at a local level allowed to take these calls because the rupee is impacting so much of your performance?
If you think about it, it's not so much that they don't give you the flexibility. They don't say you should do that because you don't have the skills to do it, right? I think what you have to do is that you've got to manage the environment in which you are faced and do it to the best of your ability. But don't try and tread out into areas that you may not necessarily. You will get your hands burnt. I mean, I may take a call on the rupee for the year and say, oh, it's going to go to X
So
and Y.
stick to what you know.
What you know well.
It looks like you have a whole lot of issues to juggle in the air, and then you've got to come out and, of course, face not just your board, but even the markets when you come out with your results. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Ravi Kirpalani, though, is no stranger to challenges. His own career has taken many interesting turns. We'll find out a little bit more about his background, his journey, along with that of Castrol. Take a step back in time. And in fact, we've changed locations and we brought you right here. It's got a historical sort of a medieval going back in time backdrop, and that's where we're going to go back right now as we talk to Ravi about his journey, how it began, both from the FMCG days, moving into Castrol and a lot more. Ravi, when you joined in 1999, about a year later, Castrol was taken over by BP. Take us through how it was like at that point in time, the challenges that you faced for yourself personally and at Castrol.
I think if we reflect back on it now, Paramita, it's been a great journey. So I think the last few years for Castrol have probably been the best in our history, not just in India, but I think across the world. And I think overall, most people would agree that that merger that happened in 2000 has gone well. I can't say that nobody had any concerns in 2000 when they were actually taking place, but I think overall it's been, I think, a very positive experience to be part of a larger company and to be able to get that resource.
But for you personally, I mean, within a year of joining and suddenly you were overtaken by this company, did it give you butterflies in your stomach? Let me go back to what I know best.
It did. I can't say that we had no such thoughts crossing our minds. I think most people, when they're sort of faced with the merger, sort of at least allow for some time to see what it's going to be like. And I think very quickly we realized that it's going to be fine because there was no attempt ever to take away from what Castrol was good at or to try and impose a different culture. And I think in many ways the values that we stood for in Castrol merged very well with the values in BP. So I think culturally there wasn't a disconnect, and I think it merged really well.
But what about for you, coming in from FMCG and, joining a lubricants industry, which on the face of it, one would think maybe, a mechanical engineer or some sort of an engineering background would give you an edge. I mean, that's a perception. What was the ground reality like?
So I think if you go back and look at the core of Castrol, I think at our heart, we are still a sales and marketing company. And I think many people, not just me, but many other people have built very successful careers in Castrol, and they've come from FMCG or from consumer products background per se. And I think the reason for that is that many of the skills that make Castrol successful today are the skills you earn your sort of stripes on within an FMCG. So it's at the end of the strength of the brands, how we're able to gain consumer insights, create propositions based on those insights, and then our focus on distribution.
If you trace back the way the market sort of took off, 2001 onwards is when India really started gaining momentum. What was your biggest challenge at that point?
The one challenge you face is that the volume of your industry is likely to go down. How are you going to manage that challenge? Now, obviously, the newer products that are being used are better quality and therefore higher value. But managing your business where the volumes may be under threat is an interesting challenge. You don't necessarily say that in FMCG, for example.
Right. What about in terms of your distribution and sales network, which today you can look back and say, Castrol has really built it up. Was it as robust then?
So I must say that many people before me and more insightful people who came into this organization a long time ago helped build that. If you go back 20 years from now, the primary channel for lubricant sale was the petrol pump. Right. So people went to get their fuel done and quite often bought their lubricant or even sort of got their lubricant changed. Now we were denied access to the petrol pumps because they were all run by national oil companies. So when faced with that, we actually developed a whole channel of distribution outside of petrol pumps. And we spent a lot of time building distribution infrastructure and creating a channel of trade which was outside of the petrol pump.
So in that journey, you also took a step out of the country for about 4 years, was it?
6 years and all.
You were in England, and thereafter you came back into the country.
Correct.
So when you came back to India, that was in 2004?
So I had two stints.
Right.
One, I went out in 1993 and came back in 1999. We were in the Middle East for 6 years in Muscat. The other stint was in 2005. I went down to the UK. I'm still with Castrol. I did a job in global strategy for 4 years, and I came back in 2009.
So again, did you encounter a very different market when you came back?
We say in India, so the market changes pretty rapidly, and somebody who's been out of the market for 4 years needs some quick catching up to do. The market is changing. In our industry, you can see it's moving from what we call commercial vehicles. So they used to be the mainstay, and cars such as this lovely one here is sort of, they're becoming much more important in terms of their importance to the overall lubricant sale. So the market is changing. The channels are changing. We used to sell largely in the shops. Today, workshops are a much more important channel. So the market's moving from shop to workshop. There's always catching up to do, but it's not insurmountable. So you haven't lost out so much in 4 or 5 years that you're unable to catch up, but you need to bring yourself up to speed.
So now you just mentioned your earlier stint, because
Correct.
since we're taking a step back in time, let's take a step out of Castrol.
Okay.
For 6 years you were in Muscat, somewhat like an entrepreneur, would it be fair to say? That was
So for part of it like an entrepreneur, and we were talking about this, and I think the first bit I was working for an FMCG company, so very similar to my Reckitt and Coleman days, and went abroad. This is a local company, but very much into the same sort of line. And then for a few years I stepped out and did something much more entrepreneurial. And this is something local to Oman, and we tried to create a plant that could help process dates, which is the local produce in Oman, and create something called date syrup and date fiber, which wasn't so difficult. We could do it, but then we had to find a use for the same product, which was a bit of a challenge because they had no known uses there.
So not only did you have a new product, find a market for that product, then of course they are accompanying all the other issues. So did it also help in sort of developing a different attitude? For instance, when here as chief of operations, when you face those challenges, do you sort of pick up on any nuggets of experience or learnings or attitudes during that time frame?
It does. So for example, one of the things you get much more dependent on when you work for a large organization like the one that I do is that you become sort of reliant on the support systems that you have, right? So somebody will be there to take care of some of the issues that you face. I think being an entrepreneur sort of tells you that there are times when those systems might fail or may not be there, and therefore you need to be ready to take it on your own hands. So I think that learning that, in a sense, you as chief executive, also the kind of guy who's going to put the lights out at night and make sure that basic things happen, your ability to focus on the really important ground level business decisions are probably heightened, I would say,
Right.
if you worked in a startup, if you worked in a sort of entrepreneurial situation.
So, Ravi, just on a final note, in fact, I want to know, how would you say you have changed, both as a manager and on a personal front, over these last many years, which have taken you all across the world and finally back here in India?
I think in some ways the most significant development has been one of sort of slowing down, allowing the sort of pace to sort of come to terms with the pace that I want to keep. And more importantly, being much more aware of what my strengths and weaknesses are. And I think as an individual today, I feel a lot more relaxed about talking about my development areas or being open about those issues. Because frankly, I've come to a stage in life where I can see where I have come to, and more importantly, what else I need to get better at. So in a sense, coming much more terms to what you are and where you want to go, and then reaching out for help where you need help.
Well, that's a level of self-awareness I think we'd all like to come to. But Ravi, your journey isn't over yet. You've still got a lot more to share with us. And that's going to be part of our next trip right here on the Skoda Superb Drive. Stay with us as we take you further along on that journey. For us to look forward. What does Castrol India have store for its customers? Ravi, tell us, will you be sticking to more or less the same strategy? What's the big picture in the next 5 years?
Looking forward over the next 5 years, there are going to be 3 large drivers of growth. The first is that as incomes rise, there are going to be, in our estimate, maybe 50 million new cars and bikes sold in India. That's a large number. So that's going to drive lubricant usage, is going to drive automobile ownership. The second aspect is that the government is going to get serious, I think, at some point about investing in infrastructure.
Right.
So we have to spend that very large sum of money. And the third source of growth is actually in terms of value. You look at cars such as this one that sort of bring in cutting edge technology into our country. They use a very modern and a very technologically advanced grade of lubricants.
Now, Castrol's been here for almost a century, and one of the challenges that many companies who've had such a long legacy is to really reorient themselves and to stay young, so to speak, and in sync with the changing customer. So has that been a challenge, and how are you reorienting yourself to face that?
It's a huge challenge because, I mean, if you look at the profile of our business, it was largely commercial vehicles that used to be and still is a dominant part of our business. The future is about personal mobility, it's about younger consumers, it's about bikes, it's about cars, and it's about women. Frankly, women ownership of automobiles wasn't a big chunk. Now you see these new gearless scooters that are coming back into the market, and a large percentage of people who own these are actually women.
Right.
So we're developing a new target segment. So they now span. So they are not just urban, they're not just young, they're young and old, they are men and women, and we have to stay ahead of how we can continue to connect. And we're using a range of media. So we're using conventional media, but last year we discovered the joys of digital and social media.
Right.
A lot of our young urban bikers sort of interestingly hang out more on Facebook than they hang out anywhere else.
Absolutely.
And how does Castrol build a bridge to where they are?
Maybe it's just my perception or a limited perception, but when one thinks of Castrol, one thinks of, some of the Bollywood stars like a John Abraham. You think of cricket, obviously. But, if you think of going beyond that, the brand being built and in that sense leaving a legacy beyond that, automatically one thinks of CSR. And how has Castrol been faring on that front, and how do you really see yourself developing further on that plan?
So I think that's a great question, Paramita. I think Castrol has a huge passion for safety. And I think one of the areas that we want to do more on is to say, what can we do to take driving safety in particular to a larger audience? And we've done some work, but limited work, to saying how we can reach out to all sorts of people, including young school children. And one of our big insights is when the child in the family comes back home and speaks to his parent about saying, don't use the mobile phone when you're driving or put on your seatbelt, it's probably much more powerful a motivator for that mother or father than anything else we could do. So how do we get the children interested in the safety story? The second aspect is that we deal with mechanics, for example, who quite often find themselves at a fairly marginal part. If you think of motorcycle mechanics, then as the technology of bikes improves, they find themselves a little bit hard placed to service some of these newer technology bikes. So over the last 3 years, we've reached out to 100,000 motorcycle mechanics, largely as a CSR activity.
We are seeing a fairly high burnout rate, and some managers have actually gotten a bad name. In fact, India Inc. has, for trying to over-deliver and in the process perhaps bypassing certain practices. But in order to meet those targets, which have been set in many cases by the parent of the multinational companies they're working for, I'm sure you would know a little bit about what that's about. How do you sort of survive that and move on from there?
So I think one, as I said, is just make sure you can get that balance and understand what you need to do as an individual to be physically capable of dealing with that stress. The second is the mental toughness, and part of it is the fact your belief about what the longer term is going to be. So maybe part of the reason why I've been able to deal with this is that I still passionately believe that
Right.
India is a growth market. And
Right.
even if we had some challenges near term, in the longer term we will grow. And I think that passion sort of comes through in everything I say and do. And as I engage other stakeholders, we make sure that we can communicate to them why we should all stay invested in India, because this is one of the most exciting
In fact,
growth
that's what
markets.
stands out, your passion and wanting to move forward. Do you see yourself getting back into an entrepreneurial sort of role that you perhaps ventured out in? Does that still excite you?
Who knows? Never say never. At the moment, I'm looking, certainly I enjoy what I'm doing.
Right.
I like to see how I can do that job better and what else I can do to contribute in this final leg. What happens thereafter? We retire in life at 60, and most people are still young when they're 60.
Right.
So we'll see where life takes us beyond that. But at the moment, I'm pretty focused on making sure we can continue to hope that Castrol remains a huge growth driver for BP.
Ravi Kirpalani, many thanks. It's been a pleasure to meet up with a leader such as yourself, who's so calm and pragmatic and really focused on what he wants to do. We wish you all the very best. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Skoda Super Drive, at least as far as you and I are concerned. My journey with Ravi continues, because Ravi will take you on a hard-earned lunch now.
Thank you for
Thank you
everything.
so much for spending so much of time. But follow me.